I'm Natalie Morgan, 24 years old, and despite everything I've achieved, I've always felt like I didn't belong in my own family. I spent years striving for approval from my parents, but no matter how hard I tried, it never came. The one moment I thought would change everything, my graduation day, came and went, with no recognition from them at all. My mom posted vacation videos from Hawaii, celebrating with my sister, while I stood alone waiting for a simple acknowledgement. It didn't come. Instead, 1 week later, my dad called to remind me about a loan payment that hadn't been made. I told him one thing and hung up. Don't contact me. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to prove yourself when no one else seemed to see you. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, in a house that looked perfect on the outside. 2 stories, white paint, a manicured lawn, everything in its place. My dad David liked to tell the neighbors how we were the ideal American family, the hardworking dad, the stay-at-home mom, 2 daughters who followed the rules, and a house that never seemed out of order. But behind closed doors, the reality was much different. From the time I was little, I knew my sister Emily was the one they valued. She was outgoing, charming, and quick to impress. I, on the other hand, was shy, quiet, and always buried in a book or a notebook filled with scribbled ideas. I loved science, and I dreamed of creating something that could change the world, but it always felt like Emily was the one who mattered. Every time I would try to share my latest project or tell my parents about an achievement, they'd turn the conversation back to her. When I won a science fair at school, I thought for sure that this time they'd be proud. But my mom barely glanced at the certificate before putting it aside to hang up a beauty pageant poster for Emily. That was how it went year after year. Emily was the star, and I was just there. When I worked hard to earn top marks in my science classes, it was nothing compared to the celebration for Emily's wins in speech contests or her social accomplishments. I started to believe that no matter what I did, I would always come second in their eyes. Over time, I stopped expecting praise. I stopped hoping for attention. Instead, I kept my triumphs to myself, jotting down my thoughts in a diary, trying to make sense of it all. I remember writing in there, "If I get an A today, will they finally smile at me? Or I've worked so hard, but will it ever be enough?" And it wasn't. The harder I tried to prove myself, the more invisible I became. I began to wonder if my worth would ever be recognized. High school wasn't any better. While my friends' parents cheered them on, helped with their future plans, and showed up for them, my parents were nowhere to be found. I was on my own, seeking guidance from teachers who saw potential in me, not my family. Mr. Patterson, my science teacher, was the first to notice my drive, and he encouraged me to take my experiments further. His words meant everything because they came from someone who wasn't just focused on Emily's latest achievement. They made me realize that if I was going to make something of myself, I would have to do it on my own. No one else was going to be there for me. As I spent hours after school in the lab, Emily was out with friends driving the car my parents had bought her. I'd watch her from the sidewalk, my arms full of books, as she laughed with their approval. I never wanted that life, but I longed for the affection I saw her receiving. I thought that maybe, just maybe, if I became successful enough, my parents would see me. But the truth was, their support was always for Emily, and I was left to fend for myself. I would take long walks home after school, wishing for the warmth of their praise that would never come. By the time I was applying to colleges, I had learned not to expect anything. The scholarships I earned were mine alone, paid for with my own hard work. But every time I tried to share the news with my parents, they gave me the same flat response. "That's nice, but don't forget your chores." It didn't matter how many scholarships I earned or how many summer programs I was accepted into. I kept it to myself because I knew they wouldn't care. So I kept going, not for their recognition, but for my own. I didn't know it yet, but those small moments of independence were shaping who I was becoming. It was a bittersweet feeling when I got into the University of Washington. I had dreamed of it for so long, and when it finally happened, I felt both excited and uncertain. Would things be different now? Would my parents see me? Or would I still be that invisible daughter who never quite measured up? And on that day when I walked across the stage to receive my degree, the emptiness of their absence cut deeper than any of the words they had ever said. I remember the day my parents skipped my graduation like it was yesterday. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and the excitement in the auditorium was palpable. My heart was racing as I stood in line with my classmates, waiting for my name to be called. I had worked so hard to get here, countless late nights in the library internships that took everything out of me and never once letting up on my studies. All of that led to this moment, this one day that should have felt like a victory. But when I looked out into the crowd, hoping to see my parents there, I saw nothing. My chair remained empty, a painful reminder that no one from my family had bothered to show up. In their place was an empty space where I imagined my mother and father sitting probably somewhere in Hawaii, enjoying the vacation they'd taken without a second thought. Not a word of congratulations, not even a text or a call. I didn't want to believe it, but it was true. My sister Emily had always been the one they cared about, and on this day, it was clear she was still the favorite. I had learned to accept it over the years, but this was different. This wasn't just another missed milestone or ignored accomplishment. This was my graduation, something that had meant so much to me, and they didn't even think I was worth showing up for. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, but it hurt in a way I couldn't ignore. The emptiness of that chair next to my classmates' proud families felt like a blow to my chest. After the ceremony, when everyone rushed to greet their parents, I stood by myself in the crowd trying to pretend I wasn't crushed by the absence. I texted my mom hoping for a simple word of support, but got nothing. Instead, a few hours later, my dad sent a message. "Yes, that's good. Emily's doing well with her work. We're proud of her too." That was it. No mention of my achievement. Not a single word about the award I had received that day. It wasn't just that they didn't care. It felt like they didn't even notice the difference anymore. It was all about Emily, and I was just background noise. I had spent my entire life trying to make them proud, trying to prove my worth. But no matter how hard I worked, no matter how many honors I received, it was never enough. And when I saw them post vacation photos online later that night, celebrating with Emily, I knew without a doubt where I stood. My success meant nothing to them. It never had. And in that moment, as I scrolled through their pictures of drinks on the beach with the caption, "Emily's been a true gem for the family, so proud of her," I understood the truth I had been denying all along. I was invisible to them, and I always would be. I took a deep breath and tried to move on. It wasn't easy, though. The loneliness and pain of that moment lingered long after the celebration ended. But the next day, I woke up and reminded myself that I couldn't rely on them for validation. If I wanted something more from life, I would have to make it happen on my own. The idea stung, but it was also a relief. I had been waiting for them to change, for them to see me the way they saw Emily. But I had to stop waiting. I had to stop hoping. I buried myself in work the next few weeks. There was no time to dwell on what I didn't have, not when the world was moving forward without me. I threw myself into my job search, knowing that my next step was crucial. I had learned the hard way that my parents weren't going to be there to support me, but I also knew that didn't mean I couldn't succeed. I didn't need their approval, even if it hurt to admit it. I had been getting by on my own for years, and now it was time to make that independence count. Despite the bitterness that still lingered in me, I forced myself to keep pushing forward. I applied for positions, honed my skills, and stayed focused. The pain of the graduation day was still there, but it became more manageable. I had learned to live without their affection, even if that meant facing the truth about how little they cared. It was time to embrace my future on my own terms. But just as I began to feel like I was moving past the hurt, a call came in that would pull me back into the reality of my family's expectations. My phone buzzed, and the name on the screen made my stomach twist. Dad. I hesitated for a moment before answering. The conversation that followed would be the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would have to decide how much I was willing to sacrifice to finally break free from my family's grip. The phone call from my dad was just the beginning of a spiral I couldn't ignore. His voice was cold, distant, and I felt a pit forming in my stomach as he asked Natalie the loan payments haven't been made. I had to stop myself from responding too quickly. It had been years since I'd relied on them for anything but this request. This demand hit me harder than I expected. The first thing that came to mind was what loan I remembered the day I paid off my tuition. It was a struggle, but I did it on my own. I'd been working part-time jobs, picking up freelance projects, and living frugally just to get by. I had no debts left, nothing they could still claim. But there he was, asking me to help with something I knew wasn't mine to pay. I told him the truth. I've paid off every cent of my tuition. There's no loan left. But my father didn't seem to hear me. Instead, his voice tightened like a man trapped in his own lie. Well, you know the family needs this. Emily's wedding coming up, and we're all stretched thin. You should think of your sister. A wave of anger flooded me, but I stayed calm. Emily. Of course. Emily always seemed to be the reason I had to give up anything of my own. For the family, I was always expected to sacrifice. My dad's voice carried on, but I couldn't focus on the words anymore. All I could hear was that familiar refrain of their favoritism echoing in my mind. My sister was the one who had always come first. I'd learned to accept it, but not like this. They had missed my graduation. They didn't care about my accomplishments, and now they wanted to drain me dry for something that wasn't even my responsibility. I hung up without saying much else. The phone call ended, but the weight of it didn't. I wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, but I knew better. Instead, I let the silence settle in, letting it stretch between us as I stared at the screen, fighting back tears I hadn't realized were building. I spent the next few days lost in my thoughts, trying to process what had just happened. My life was supposed to be mine. My victories, my struggles, my successes, none of them were supposed to be measured against Emily. But here I was again, standing in her shadow, watching as she received the lion's share of the family's support, while I was expected to play the part of the dutiful daughter always behind the scenes. It wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the realization that no matter what I achieved, I would always be the afterthought in their eyes. My father had once told me that family comes first. But for me, family felt more like a chain than a support system. I realized in that moment that I could never trust them to prioritize me, not in the way I needed. A few days passed and I could feel the bitterness creeping in, settling deep in my chest. I went through the motions of everyday life, doing my work, meeting with friends, pretending that nothing had changed. But it had. The quiet pain I had carried for so long was suddenly louder, and I knew I had to make a choice. I went to the coffee shop I often frequented on weekends to clear my head. As usual, I sat by the window watching the world outside move at its own pace while I remained stuck in my thoughts. Sophie joined me there, as she often did when she knew something was weighing on me. She sat down across from me, a cup of coffee in hand. "What happened?" she asked, her tone soft, knowing that I had something heavy on my mind. I let out a breath, staring at the steam rising from my cup. "They want me to pay for Emily's wedding." I said the words tasting bitter as I said them out loud. Sophie didn't ask for more details. She knew. She'd seen it all before, the way my parents would ask for something all while taking me for granted. Sophie just looked at me, her eyes understanding. "You don't have to do it, you know. You've worked too hard to let them use you like that." I shook my head, trying to hold it together. I don't know what else to do. Every time I try to stand up for myself, they make me feel like I'm being selfish, like I'm the one who's wrong for not giving in. "That's not your fault," Sophie said firmly. "They've always treated you like this. You've got to stop letting them. You've made it this far on your own. You don't owe them anything." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a little spark of something inside me. It wasn't enough to make the pain go away, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't as powerless as I felt. Maybe it was time to stop letting them control me, to stop living in a way that always made me feel like I was in second place. That night, I decided to take a step. I called my dad again, prepared this time to confront him. But when I picked up the phone, I realized I didn't even know where to begin. My heart raced as I dialed, unsure of how to explain the way I felt. When he answered, I froze for a moment. "Natalie," my dad's voice was as detached as ever. "What's on your mind?" I swallowed hard, feeling a lump in my throat. "I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've given everything I can, and it's still not enough. You've never been there for me when it counted, not at my graduation, not at any of my achievements. And now you want me to sacrifice my future to fund Emily's wedding. I can't do it anymore." The silence on the other end was suffocating. I could hear my father breathing, but no words came. For a moment, it felt like the entire world was holding its breath with me. "I'm sorry, but I'm not going to help," I said, my voice a little firmer this time. "I'm done." When I hung up, I felt a rush of relief, but also a deep ache in my chest. It wasn't the kind of relief that came from knowing I'd won a battle, but the kind that came from finally standing up for myself after years of staying quiet. And while I was relieved, I was also unsure of what came next. It was a turning point, no doubt about it. But the road ahead still felt uncertain, filled with challenges I hadn't yet imagined. And as I sat there alone in my apartment, I realized I couldn't go back. The family I had once dreamed of, one that would love me for who I was never going to be the family I needed. And as hard as it was to accept, I knew I was going to have to find my way forward without them. But that didn't mean I was alone. And I knew the next step would come when I least expected it. I spent the next few weeks in a haze. I had finally said it out loud, finally told my father I wouldn't help with Emily's wedding, and I wasn't going to take any more of their manipulation. But the relief was fleeting. The silence that followed my decision wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. It felt like the world had stopped for me, while everything else kept moving on around me. At first, I thought that cutting ties with them would somehow ease the burden of my years of resentment. But it didn't. It only left me with a sense of emptiness, a hole where I once had hope. I tried to stay busy working on projects, catching up with friends, and focusing on my career, but I couldn't escape the constant ache of knowing that my family wasn't there for me, not even when I needed them the most. Then one afternoon, Sophie and I decided to meet at our favorite cafe by Lake Union. It was a place that had become my sanctuary in the months after I started at the University of Washington. The calm atmosphere always helped clear my mind. I ordered my usual latte and sat by the window watching the boats on the water as they drifted by. Sophie arrived a few minutes later, her usual bright smile lighting up the space. She always knew when something was wrong. "Okay, Spill," she said, sitting down across from me. "What's going on? You're acting like you're carrying the weight of the world." I let out a breath and shook my head. "It's just everything, Sophie. It's like no matter what I do, I'm not good enough for them. And I feel so empty. I did everything right. I made it on my own, got through school, earned every scholarship, and still, it's like none of that matters. My family never sees it. I was always just a shadow next to Emily." Sophie took a sip of her coffee, her eyes soft with understanding. "Natalie, you've done everything on your own. You've earned every bit of success you've had, and that's what matters. You're not invisible. You just need to stop looking for validation from the people who'll never give it to you." I nodded, but her words didn't fully sink in yet. I knew she was right, but it didn't change how it felt. Still, Sophie was my rock, the person who saw me for who I really was. I hadn't realized how much I had been clinging to the hope that my family would one day come around, that somehow they'd realize what they'd been missing all these years. But now the truth was undeniable. They would never change. "I just don't know how to stop caring about it," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "It's like I've been waiting for them to see me, but I don't even know what I'd do if they did." Sophie's eyes softened with sympathy. "You can't keep waiting for them, Nat. You've done the work. You've earned your place, but you have to start living for you, not for them. They may never see it, but you know your worth. You know what you've done." Her words were like a quiet breakthrough, but I wasn't sure I could let go of the part of me that kept hoping for their approval. I looked out the window, the light from the afternoon sun catching the water's surface. It reminded me of how far I had come, how much I had achieved, despite the distance between me and my parents. The realization didn't come easily, but I could feel it slowly settling inside me. It was time to stop waiting. That evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I pulled out the journal I had kept over the years. The pages were filled with so much pain, disappointment, and longing, but also with hope that things could be different if I worked hard enough. But that hope had begun to feel like a burden. It was as if I was carrying around someone else's dream, one that wasn't even mine. I opened to a blank page, staring at the empty space before me. For the first time in a long while, I began to write something different. I wrote about my accomplishments, about the scholarship that had taken me to college, the internship that had shaped my career path, and the quiet resilience I had built. I wrote about the strength I had found on my own, despite the absence of support from the one place I had always hoped would have it. And then with a steady hand, I wrote the hardest words I had ever written. I no longer need their approval. I no longer need their love to validate my worth. When I finished, I closed the journal and let the weight of those words sink in. It felt like a quiet kind of freedom, one that I had been afraid to embrace for so long. The next few days passed in a blur. I focused on my studies, buried myself in my work, and even found time to enjoy simple things. But something had shifted. I felt more present in my own life, less consumed by the pull of family expectations. It wasn't that I had stopped caring about them. It was that I had finally come to terms with the reality that their love wasn't something I could rely on. One day after class, I ran into Liam outside the campus library. He was the teaching assistant for one of my courses, but more than that, he had become someone I could trust. We had become friends over the past year, and I had even started to see him in a different light. We spent hours talking about everything, our shared interests, our hopes for the future, and even the small, meaningful moments that shaped our days. "Hey, you look better," Liam said, offering me a smile. "How have you been?" I hesitated for a moment. It was hard to explain even to him, but something inside me knew I could be honest. "I've been figuring things out," I said softly. "It's still a process, but I think I'm finally starting to realize what I need to do for myself." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Whatever it is, you've got this. You don't need anyone's permission to live the life you want. You've already proven that to yourself." His words were simple, but they meant more than I could express. I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of validation that didn't come from anyone else. It came from within. As the days passed, I began to feel more at ease in my own skin. I had made peace with the fact that my family might never change, and that in itself was a relief. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything. But as I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of something bigger, something that would finally set me free from the chains of their expectations. I had already made the hard decision to let go. The only thing left now was to see what would happen next. And as the weeks went by, I realized that the next step was closer than I thought. The call came one evening while I was still in the middle of a late-night study session. I had just wrapped up a report for one of my classes and was feeling more than a little drained. As I leaned back in my chair, stretching my tired muscles, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was my father again. I almost didn't answer. I had no idea what new request he could possibly have after the last one, but my curiosity got the better of me. I pressed the button and put the phone to my ear, already bracing for whatever would come next. "Natalie, we need to talk." His voice was clipped as usual. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," I replied, the words coming out more firmly than I expected. "I've made myself clear. Your sister's wedding is coming up, and there's still the matter of the family finances." He didn't sound surprised, just matter of fact. "We're going to need your help. It's for Emily. You know how important this is." I could feel the anger rising again, but I swallowed it down, trying to stay calm. "No, I don't know. You've never asked for my help before, and I'm not going to start now. You had no problem with Emily getting everything she wanted. You never once thought to help me when I was struggling." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. It was almost as if he hadn't expected me to say those words, or maybe he didn't know how to respond. "What do you mean, struggling? You've always been fine, haven't you?" I let out a breath. I had to make it on my own. "Dad, I worked for everything I have. I'm not going to be your backup anymore. I won't be dragged into this. You've already taken so much from me." The silence stretched heavy and thick. I could hear him breathing, trying to find the right words. But they never came. I didn't give him the chance to speak again. "I've paid off every cent of my tuition. I've built my future without your help. I'm done," I said before ending the call. My heart was pounding in my chest as I sat there staring at the blank screen of my phone. I'd finally done it. I'd stood up for myself, even if it didn't feel like much of a victory yet. But it did feel like something had shifted. I had resisted. I wasn't just some passive player in my family's expectations anymore. I had drawn the line, and for once I wasn't afraid to say no. The next few days were a blur. I felt a mix of relief and guilt. The guilt came from the part of me that still wanted my family's approval, still wanted them to notice what I had done. But the relief, oh the relief, came from not having to carry that weight anymore. I knew they would never understand, but that was something I had to accept. Sophie noticed the change, of course. She was one of the few people who had seen me struggle all these years. She had watched me bend over backward trying to get my parents to see me trying to prove my worth to them, but now she saw the quiet confidence in me that had been missing for so long. "I'm proud of you, Nat," she said one afternoon, as we sat on the steps outside the library sipping on iced coffee. "You're finally doing what you need to do for yourself." "I don't know if it feels like enough yet," I admitted, looking out at the campus as students rushed by. "I'm still not sure what's next. I feel like there's a lot I have to work through." "That's okay," Sophie said, her voice warm. "But you're not carrying that burden anymore. That's huge. You don't need to explain yourself to them anymore. You've done what's right for you, and that's what matters." Her words meant a lot. They helped me realize that while I had made the first step, there was still more to do. It wasn't just about standing up to my parents, it was about learning to stand up for myself in every aspect of my life. And that's when I began to think about what was next. No longer tethered to the expectations my parents had set, I started to carve out my own path. I continued with my studies, diving deeper into my data science coursework, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I was moving forward on my own terms. I was doing something that I was passionate about, something that didn't rely on anyone's approval but my own. Still, I couldn't entirely push the past away. As the days passed, my thoughts often wandered back to the phone call with my dad. I had stood up for myself, yes, but a part of me still wondered if they'd ever really understand, if they'd ever see me for who I was, and not just as the one who always made the sacrifices for the family. But I had to accept that maybe that day would never come, and maybe that was okay. My life, my future wasn't about them anymore, it was about me. By the time my internship at the tech company began, I was already starting to feel the freedom of that decision. The work was challenging and stimulating in ways I hadn't expected. I had begun to prove to myself that I could be successful without anyone's help. The team I worked with was smart-driven and full of new ideas, and I felt like I was starting to find my place in the world. One afternoon, as we were wrapping up a brainstorming session, my manager called me into his office. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure if it was a good or bad sign, but when I walked in, he was smiling. "Great job on that project, Natalie," he said. "Your approach to analyzing the data is really impressive. I think we should get you involved in the next phase. You're exactly what we need." I smiled a real, honest smile. For the first time, I realized that it wasn't just about proving my worth to anyone else. I had earned that recognition. And this time, it was for me. It was a small moment, but it felt huge to me. It felt like everything had shifted, like the weight I had been carrying for so long was finally lifting. Still, there was one thing left to deal with. As I walked out of my manager's office, I saw a missed call from my father. I took a deep breath, unsure of how to respond. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I had to face this. I tapped the screen and pressed the phone to my ear, bracing myself. When he spoke, I could hear the hesitance in his voice. "Natalie," he began, "I think we need to talk." I closed my eyes for a moment, preparing myself. This wasn't over yet, I knew that, but I was ready now. I wasn't that same girl anymore, and this time I would handle it on my terms. I stared at the phone for a few seconds after hanging up on my father. The words "we need to talk" echoed in my mind, lingering like a storm that hadn't yet passed. I didn't want to pick up. Part of me was still angry, no more than angry I was hurt, but the reality was clear. I had to face this. I had to face them. The next day I called him back. "Dad," I said when he picked up, my voice steady, though the nerves were creeping in. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to back down now. "Nat, I'm glad you called back." His voice sounded different this time, quieter, like he was trying to choose his words carefully. "I know things have been tense between us, but this wedding, this is important for the family." We're struggling. I thought you might be able to help, especially now that things are looking better for you. Looking better for me. I repeated the words in disbelief. I've always taken care of myself, Dad. You've never been there when I needed you, and now you want me to help fund Emily's wedding like that's going to make up for all of this. I paused, gathering my thoughts, knowing this would be the moment that changed everything. I can't do this anymore. I can't be your fallback, the one who cleans up the messes you and Mom make. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could feel the tension in the air stretching between us. My dad was always the one to set the tone, to hold the power in our relationship. But not anymore. I'm sorry, Natalie, he finally said, his voice quieter. I thought I could count on you. There was a weariness in his tone now that hadn't been there before. But if that's how you feel, I won't push it. You've made your decision. I was stunned by his resignation. All these years of fighting for their recognition, trying to gain their approval, and this was how it ended, with a quiet acceptance of my refusal. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to feel. Relief, guilt. Or was it just numbness? I have to go, I said, cutting the call short. I couldn't stay in that conversation any longer. I wasn't ready to hear more excuses or apologies that felt like nothing but empty words. It wasn't that I wanted them to suffer. I just needed the space to stop carrying their expectations, to let go of the weight that had been on my shoulders for so long. That evening, I sat in my small apartment staring at the walls. I should have felt proud, maybe even liberated. But the truth was, I felt more alone than ever before. It wasn't just that I'd cut ties with them. It was that in doing so, I had given up on the family I had once dreamed of. I had let go of the hope that maybe, just maybe, they would see me. And now I was free from them, but the world felt emptier. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. I wasn't expecting anyone. But when I opened it, there stood Liam. He looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You okay?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I shook my head, fighting back the lump in my throat. I don't know. I thought it would feel different, standing up for myself, cutting them out. But it's hard. It's harder than I thought it would be. Liam didn't say anything at first. He just wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a hug. I didn't expect it, but I needed it. For once, it felt like someone was really there for me. Someone who didn't need me to prove myself. "You've done the hardest thing, Nat," he said quietly. "You're choosing yourself, and that's the most important thing you can do. You're stronger than you know." I stayed in his arms for a few moments, letting the tears fall. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that, how much I needed someone to remind me that what I was doing wasn't wrong. It was just necessary. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept myself busy work-study, some late-night sessions with Liam discussing data analysis, our shared love for solving problems. I threw myself into my career, determined to make something of myself without the burden of my parents hanging over me. But no matter how many hours I spent at my desk or how many numbers I crunched, the truth of my family's absence stayed with me. I had thought that cutting them out would give me the space I needed to heal. But the emptiness lingered, a constant reminder that no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape the fact that I was still their daughter. And in their eyes, I would always be the one who didn't quite measure up. One afternoon, as I worked in the lab, I received a text from Sophie. It was a short message. "Can we talk?" I hadn't heard from her much since that conversation with my dad. She knew the struggle I was facing, and I had a feeling she wanted to check in. I met her at our usual cafe by the lake that evening. Sophie was already there, sipping a coffee and watching the boats gliding by. She looked up as I sat down across from her, her eyes warm with understanding. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, breaking the silence before I could even speak. "I know it's hard, but you're doing something huge. You're taking back control." I nodded, grateful for her support, but still feeling like a part of me was missing. "I don't feel strong, Sophie. I just feel lost. I'm still not sure what comes next." She reached out, placing a hand on mine. "You don't need to have it all figured out. You've already made the hardest part. You've put yourself first for once, and that's what matters. The rest will come." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But even though I had chosen to let go of my family's expectations, the thought of them lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something I hadn't yet discovered. The next morning, I was walking to class when I passed a bookstore I used to frequent as a child. It seemed like such a small thing, but as I walked past it, I was reminded of the old Natalie, the one who used to dream of being seen, of proving herself to everyone, even if they never noticed her. And suddenly I knew. I wasn't going to wait for them anymore. Not for my family. Not for anyone. I was going to build the future I wanted on my own terms, and for the first time in years I felt a glimmer of hope. But as I moved forward, I knew one thing: my journey was far from over. The next chapter was about to unfold, and I was finally ready to step into it. It had been weeks since I cut ties with my family, and I had been managing the quiet aftermath, learning to live with the decision. But even though I felt more at peace with myself, I knew my parents hadn't let go of their expectations. They hadn't stopped trying to pull me back in, and I hadn't heard the last of their demands. It was one Saturday afternoon when I got a call from my cousin Mary. Her voice was filled with anger and disbelief as soon as I picked up the phone. "Natalie, do you know what's going on? Everyone's talking about you, and I'm so sorry, but your parents are making a scene." I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean, what's happening?" "Everyone in the family is starting to see it. They're saying your parents skipped your graduation. They went to Hawaii with Emily, and now they're asking you for money. It's all over. The whole family's talking about it." I sat back, my mind spinning. The worst part wasn't the gossip. It was the fact that my parents had spent all this time pretending like everything was fine, and now the truth was coming out. After all the years of being overlooked and taken for granted, after everything I'd tried to do to make them proud, they still weren't content. Instead, they were trying to manipulate me into giving them money for Emily's wedding, all while pretending to be the perfect family in front of everyone else. Mary's voice softened. "I just wanted to warn you. It's ugly, Nat. People are starting to see through them. They're not the perfect family they've always tried to act like." I felt a mixture of relief and bitterness. Relief that the truth was coming out, but bitter because I'd spent years living in a shadow, always hoping for a moment like this. And now when it finally arrived, it wasn't even something I could savor. It wasn't a victory. It was just proof that my family's lies were falling apart. But it wasn't just the family that was talking. It was the whole neighborhood. That night I received a call from a former neighbor, someone who had known me since I was little. "Natalie," she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "We've all been hearing about your family, and I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. It's shameful. Your parents always made such a big show of their perfect little family, but we all see what's going on now." I had expected the gossip, but hearing it from someone who had once considered my parents' friends felt like a slap in the face. For years they had worked so hard to maintain their reputation as the perfect family, and now it was all coming undone. The image they had created was cracking piece by piece. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of justice, knowing that the truth was finally making its way into the open. But at the same time there was a heaviness in my chest. Why had it taken so long? Why did it take me cutting ties with them for anyone to finally see what I'd lived with for years? As the days went on, the whispers grew louder. I heard from other relatives, people who had once respected my parents, now expressing their dismay. The reality of what they had done couldn't be ignored anymore. But it wasn't just the family who saw it. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood as well. People had begun to question the family image they had worked so hard to cultivate. And with each passing day, my parents' perfect reputation crumbled just a little more. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. On one hand, it was a kind of vindication. The weight of years of favoritism, neglect, and manipulation was finally being acknowledged by others. But on the other hand, I knew that nothing would ever change between me and my parents. They would never see me the way I needed them to. No amount of public shame would undo the damage that had been done over the years. It didn't take long for Emily to feel the consequences of their actions either. I heard from a mutual friend of hers that her fiancé Matthew had started asking questions. "Is it true your parents skipped Natalie's graduation to go on vacation?" he had asked. "Is it true they're pressuring her to give them money for the wedding?" Matthew's parents had heard the gossip too, and according to my friend, they were less than impressed. The words that followed were a quiet but firm condemnation of my parents' actions. A family that values fairness would never act like that. If this is the kind of family you have, I'm not sure we can continue like this. Emily's fiancé distanced himself from her after that, and I could feel the subtle shift. She wasn't immune to the fallout, even though it had always been me in the background, always the one left to pick up the pieces. For once, I wasn't the one facing the consequences of my parents' actions. This time, Emily was. But even with all this, I didn't feel the sense of victory I had imagined. The truth had come out, but it hadn't changed the fact that my family had never been there for me. I had spent so long wishing for them to see me, wishing for them to understand what I'd been through. But now it was clear they would never change. The realization didn't make me angry. It just made me tired. One evening, as I sat at the table in my apartment watching the sunset from the window, I thought about everything that had led me here. It wasn't about the revenge, the gossip, or the crumbling family image. It was about something much more personal, the quiet sense of power I had found in myself. For the first time, I felt free of their control. It wasn't easy, it never had been, but I had stepped into my own life, and nothing would take that away from me. The next day, as I walked into work, I felt lighter. Things were shifting, and I was finally starting to feel like the woman I had always wanted to be, strong, independent, and whole without the need for validation from anyone else. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my journey wasn't over yet. I had faced my family, stood up to them, and let go of their expectations. But there was one last chapter to write, one final decision that would close this painful chapter once and for all. And I knew it would be the hardest decision of all. A week after everything with my family had unraveled, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the quiet cityscape outside my window. It was a peaceful evening, the kind of stillness I'd been craving for so long. Yet even with the sense of calm around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. I'd spent so many years trying to be enough for them, hoping for the love I never got. Now, with the truth laid bare for everyone to see, I wasn't sure where that left me. I had done everything I could to stand up for myself, to cut the ties that had been holding me back. But it still didn't feel like enough. There was this lingering ache inside me, a part of me that wanted closure, that needed something more from my parents. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself I didn't need them to change. But the truth was, part of me had always hoped they'd come around, that one day they'd see all the effort, all the years I had poured into proving myself. And that feeling, that hope, was something I had to finally let go of. It was the last piece of their control I hadn't surrendered. That night I wrote in my journal something I hadn't done in a while. I wrote about everything that had happened, about the long road it took for me to understand that I didn't need their validation to define my worth. I wrote about the anger, the hurt, the loneliness, but also about the strength I had found in myself. I wrote about how, even though I didn't have the family I had once dreamed of, I had everything I needed within me to keep going. And that was enough. The next day, I went for a walk with Liam by the lake. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves had just started to turn, painting the trees in shades of gold and red. We walked in silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Liam spoke, his voice gentle. "You've been through so much, Nat," he said, his hand brushing against mine. "But look at you. You've come out of it stronger than ever. I'm proud of you. You've chosen yourself, and that's the most important thing." I felt a lump in my throat. I wasn't used to hearing that, not from someone who didn't owe me anything, not someone who hadn't been there just because they had to. "It still hurts," I admitted. "Not in the way it used to, but there's still this part of me that wants them to care, to finally see me." "I know," he said softly, "but you've done the hard part, Nat. You've found your own way. You don't need them to see you the way you want. You've already proven yourself to the most important person, yourself." His words felt like a balm to the wound that had been open for so long. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known I could feel. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back, hoping for something to change. I was standing on my own, accepting that I had everything I needed right here. That evening when I got home, I sat down at my desk and typed out an email to my parents. It wasn't long, just a few lines. "I've decided to cut ties completely. I'm done waiting for something that will never come. I've worked hard to get where I am, and I no longer need to prove myself to anyone. It wasn't about anger or revenge. It was just about setting myself free from the constant pull of their expectations. It was about choosing myself, choosing the life I had built, and finally accepting that my worth wasn't tied to their love. I didn't expect them to respond. I didn't even know if they would read it. But for the first time, that didn't matter. I had said what I needed to say, and that was all that mattered. A few days later, I found a new apartment closer to work, one that felt more like mine than any place I had lived before. I spent my evenings decorating it, filling it with pieces that reflected who I was, not who they wanted me to be. And as I set each picture frame, each book on the shelf, I realized that this was my life now. This was where I belonged. As the weeks passed, I continued to grow into the person I had always wanted to be. I was excelling at work. My research projects were getting noticed, and my relationship with Liam deepened. We talked about the future, about the life we were building together, one that was full of hope, not tainted by the shadows of my past. It wasn't easy, but I learned something important through it all. True freedom comes from within. It comes from letting go of the things you can't control, from stepping away from relationships that hold you back, and from finally embracing the person you were always meant to be. I had spent so long looking outside myself for approval. But the moment I realized that my approval was all I needed, everything shifted. Life, I realized, is never perfect. But it's about the people you choose to surround yourself with, the boundaries you set, and the love you give yourself. I may never get the love I wanted from my family, but I had found something even more important, the love and respect I had earned for myself. So as I sit here now, with my new life unfolding before me, I know that I have everything I need. I don't need anyone else to tell me that I'm worthy. I've already figured that out on my own. And if you're listening to this, I want you to remember your worth isn't tied to anyone else's approval. It's yours to define, and it's always been inside you. Don't let anyone make you feel less than what you truly are. If you've been through something similar, or if this story has resonated with you in any way, share your thoughts with me. I'd love to hear your stories because we all have a voice and every story deserves to be heard. And if you're enjoying these stories, be sure to subscribe so we can keep sharing these moments together.